The ex-president's now tried and true, and unfortunately all too often successful legal strategy of delay, and then delay again finally met its match today in the form of New York Judge Juan Merchan. Donald Trump will go on trial on April 15th, the judge ruled. No ifs, ands, or buts about it this time. The ex-president, his attorneys, and prosecutors with the Manhattan DA's office gathered in court on the very same day that the trial over concealing hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels was originally supposed to begin. But instead of what was supposed to be the first day of jury selection, Team Trump and the Manhattan DA tangled over a sudden twist in the case that led to the trial being delayed. That last-minute release of nearly 100,000 pages of evidence provided by the Justice Department in its investigation of witness Michael Cohen. At stake in today's hearing, whether Trump would be able to delay legal accountability in this case as well as he has so far managed to do in the federal classified documents case and the federal election interference case. But Judge Juan Merchan did not buy what Team Trump was selling. The judge accusing Trump's defense lawyers of bringing up the issue of a delay in getting documents only to derail this trial. The judge asking why the attorneys didn't happen to mention the issue at a hearing they had back in February. The judge said this, quote, "Why didn't you bring any of this to my attention? Why didn't you tell the court or anyone in the courtroom at the time that you had made this request, that it was taking you a little longer than expected?" NBC News is reporting that the judge also, quote, brought up Trump attorney Todd Blanche's past experience in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York to highlight that he should have known the diligence that is required. Quote, "Why did you wait until 2 months before trial? Why didn't you do it in June or July?" Merchan asks. Quote, "It's not our job," says Blanche. Merchan shoots back that it's not the DA's job either. Throughout this hearing, the judge tore into Trump's attorneys. Washington Post writes it up this way. Merchan told Blanche that the latest dispute fit what he called, quote, a pattern where I read certain information, then I hear your interpretation of that, and it's really different from my interpretation. And this has been, frankly, going on for months, end quote. Far from prosecutorial misconduct involving potential evidence, Merchan said prosecutors were doing their best to be careful and thorough with their handling of that material. The Manhattan DA, quote, went so far above and beyond what they're required to do, it is really odd that we're even here and that we're taking this time, Merchan said. And after a break, the judge then ordered that the trial will begin on April 15th. The New York judge ordering the first ever criminal trial of an ex-president that will now go full speed ahead. It's where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends on this historic day. Former U.S. Attorney, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman is with us. With me at the table, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. She was inside the courtroom for us today. Plus, New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig is here. And former Republican Congressman and MSNBC political analyst David Jelly is here for the hour. Lisa, take us through what became pretty dramatic.
It was dramatic, Nicole. And one of the things that really struck me today is Todd Blanche is a person known in the New York legal community for his collegiality, a person who is easy for everyone to get along with. It was one of the hallmarks of his tenure in the Southern District of New York as a prosecutor, where he served, as Merchan elicited from him today, 9 years as a prosecutor, 4 years as a paralegal. But increasingly, even the very friendly collegial Todd Blanche is being forced into postures that are at odds with what I think Todd Blanche has done best in his career as a lawyer, which is get along with folks and try to find common ground. Because what he did today, according to Judge Merchan, was dramatic and uncalled for. He, in multiple pages of a motion that Merchan went through in painstaking detail, accused the DA's office of prosecutorial misconduct, blatant discovery violations, and, as he put it at one point, trying to make the judge complicit in those accusations, too, by saying, like, hey, the DA's office is not complying with their good faith obligations here, and you're going along with it. And while he did eventually extract a 30-day adjournment out of it and got no further, in the process of that, squandered so much credibility with the court before jury selection has even began, that while this is part of Trump's usual MO, delay, stall, and ignore again, he really didn't get much out of it other than really angering the judge who will preside over, as you noted, his first ever criminal trial.
And so just remind everyone what this is about. This is about SDNY's documents or documents about Michael Cohen.
Right, and they had a case that was going, and they ultimately, it didn't go forward, and there was documents that were not turned over. And so late in the game, they ended up, like in recent weeks, ended up turning them over, and this caused what happened today.
What do you make about where we stand right now, sort of on the precipice of the first ever criminal trial of Donald Trump over this of all? I mean, it makes it trivial to talk about them like some sort of fantasy basketball bracket, but of all of the alleged criminality on Trump's part, this is the one for which there are copies of checks signed by Trump in the Oval Office, where there are recipients of the money who don't doubt don't call into question or doubt the alleged relationships or relations or the nature of them. There's an election that we all know happened. So the facts are so well established, not just by witness testimony, but by documents. What do you expect as this gets underway?
Well, it is interesting that this is the one that is going to go forward, and it's still in question whether the other ones will. People say this is, people have called it the weakest case. I don't know if that's true, but it's a very unusual case. But at the same time, I think it is fairly cinematic, and I think could be strong to sell to a jury. You have a payment to a porn star in the final weeks of an election in order to influence the outcome, to silence her, and other evidence will be brought in about other payments that were made. The Access Hollywood tape can't be played, but it will be, the tape will be, or the transcript will be read in. It's going to be very dramatic, and I think this is something that a jury will be easily understood versus, the last trial in front of Judge Merchan that I sat through involving Donald Trump. It was pretty complicated. That was the criminal trial for tax fraud. This one is not. I understand there's, issues with it, and it's novel in terms of getting, it kicked up to a fraud and all that, but I think a jury will understand it.
The idea that a jury is going to have to process these pieces of information, I've heard it disparaged privately and I guess increasingly publicly as the least serious. I think it's also the most obvious.
That's what I think. Perhaps
with the exception of E. Jean. It is, the facts, again, are not in dispute. There are checks signed by Trump written in the Oval Office. There is a real live porn star who I think is the witness in this. And there's a guy who went to jail who didn't have any sex with the porn star and who did. The facts are so clear.
Took money from a home equity line of credit to pay her. And what's alleged here as the crime. Right. Went to jail. And what's alleged here as the crime, and I think people mostly forget, is what happened afterwards. It's the way in which they tried to paper over the alleged campaign finance violation. Alvin Bragg doesn't have to prove that there was, in fact, any violation of federal or state law with respect to campaign finance. What he has to show is that there was a falsification of business records in an attempt to commit or conceal another crime. And that's the crime for which Michael Cohen went to jail. And we could all discuss whether other people should have been imprisoned as well, including but not limited to Donald Trump. But that's really the crime here. It's not the payoff of the porn star. It's the cover up of the payoff of the porn star in order to make sure that the American people didn't know that he paid Stormy Daniels and for what purpose and in what timing. It was a time frame where you and I, Nicole, have discussed. The campaign was in meltdown. There was a catastrophe going on. They understood that they were in big trouble with white women voters, and they were trying as best as they could to minimize that damage. And lo and behold, Stormy Daniels manifests, and she wants her money. And sure enough, they make it happen. And more importantly, Michael Cohen makes it happen with Trump's say-so. And to your other point, this isn't just a testimony and documents case. This might also be an audio tape case. We all forget about the fact that there is audio taped evidence that the boss understood what the payment was being made for. You can expect that that audio tape likely will resurface at this trial.
Right.
You were going to say something.
Well, I just think that we talk about the pressure they were under. It's that Access Hollywood tape.
Correct.
If this wasn't a trial, it should be a movie, and maybe it will be both.
Correct.
But that Access Hollywood tape was bearing down on the campaign when this happened. And that's not going to be played in court. I don't think you need to, because that was the shot heard around the world.
Absolutely.
And everybody, as they can they're going to be read the transcript in the courtroom, the jurors, they're going to be able to visualize that. But that was the stress that they were under, and it is very cinematic when you think about it.
Well, and that political, to the degree that there's a political part of what may or may not be presented to the jury, that tape is what made Reince Priebus say, "This is it, we're out. We got to flip the ticket and put, put Pence at the top." That tape is what created a political calamity where I think that was the first time only Rudy Giuliani went on to the Sunday shows. Reince Priebus refused to do it. I think, I don't know if Jared was a spokesperson yet, but no one from the family would go out. I mean, that did create a cataclysmic political moment for Trump's candidacy.
It did. The tape recorded Donald Trump laughing and bragging about sexual assault. And as much as Republicans tried to dance around that moment, I'm concerned about it, I don't like it, it's sexual assault, what he was describing. And so the campaign started to fall apart, as Lisa and Sue have pointed out. And so what did Donald Trump reach for to remedy his problem? Fraud. Fraud. And this, what I think is fascinating about this case in particular is it's the intersection of Donald Trump, the business person, and Donald Trump, the candidate. And this narrative of fraud is kind of a thread through all of his cases, including January 6th, where he's charged with conspiracy to defraud the American people of their own vote, of their own democracy. Right. And so in this case, we learned through Tish James his willingness to engage in business fraud and tax fraud. That's the charges. The 30-plus indictments center around business fraud in New York. But the underlying narrative is, why did he engage in that? Because as Donald Trump, the candidate, he had to reach for fraud to save his own campaign. That's a powerful reminder during a year in which he's running for the White House again, that this is who he is. And the voters aren't going to miss that.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.